Good morning and welcome everyone. Happy World Wetlands Day and happy Groundhog Day, maybe Groundhog Year if that feels more appropriate. And thank you for joining today's webinar, which is the first in our 4-part winter webinar series that's co-sponsored by the Kootenay Conservation Program and the Columbia Basin Trust with support from the Fish and Wildlife Compensation Program. Given the rich heritage of stewardship in the Columbia Basin, I would like to acknowledge that our work occurs in the traditional territories of the Ktunaxa, Shuswap, Sinixt, and Syilx peoples who've lived here and cared for the land, water, and wildlife for many generations. The Kootenay Conservation Program, along with the Trust and FWCP, are very excited to offer this series of webinars on the theme of building restoration and enhancement projects that make a difference. The purpose of this webinar series is to share valuable information on how to incorporate ecosystem resilience into your restoration projects with practical hands-on solutions. Through case study examples throughout the Columbia Basin, this series of webinars is designed to explore 4 key stages in project development and implementation, which are visioning and planning, taking action, monitoring and analyzing, and adapting your approach and sharing your results and recommendations. My name is Marcy Marr, and I'm KCP's Stewardship Manager and will be the host for today's webinar. Kendall Benesh, KCP's Program Assistant, is also on board to ensure that our technology runs smooth this morning. Kendall's cell phone number is in the chat box if you need support, and you can message her there. This webinar will be approximately 40 minutes with up to 15 minutes for questions at the end. Please take a moment to locate your control panel at the bottom of your screen and use the chat box for messaging the group or individuals. And please use the Q&A box to type in your question for the presenter after the presentation. The webinar will be recorded and made available on KCP's website. And also you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to the webinar's recording, along with the presenter's contact information and links to additional resources, as well as a short webinar survey. So far, we have over 120 people who've joined us this morning, and we're always interested to know who is here with us. So please respond to these 2 questions in the chat box. Where are you based and what is your affiliation? And I'll give you a few moments to do that. Well, it's great to see we have folks from the Columbia Basin and beyond, the Okanagan and the coast. Awesome. Oh, and Alberta. Thanks everybody for saying hi to each other. While some people are still joining us and settling in, I'd like to tell you a bit about the Kootenay Conservation Program, also known as KCP. We're a broad partnership founded in 2002, and this year is our 20th anniversary year. KCP's partnership is comprised of more than 80 land and water, conservation and stewardship groups, government agencies, resource industries, and agricultural producers working throughout the east and west Kootenay and southeastern BC. Our mandate is to coordinate and facilitate conservation efforts on private land and to generate the support and resources necessary to maintain this effort. And now I'd like to invite Krista Watts from the Trust and Angus Glass from FWCP to also welcome you to this webinar. Krista, over to you.
Thanks, Marcy. I'm Krista Watts. I'm an environment lead at the Columbia Basin Trust, and ecosystem enhancement remains a strategic priority for the Trust, which is one of the 6 strategic priorities, as well as the 2 integrated priorities of climate resilience and working with Indigenous peoples. These priorities stem from what basin residents say are important. In addition to ecosystem enhancement being a strategic priority, it's also a trust program that supports landscape scale projects that help maintain and improve ecological health and native biodiversity in the basin. We put a link in the chat to the Ecosystem Enhancement Program webpage and recommend that you check it out, as there's a program guide that walks through the program in detail. The Trust initiated and is assisting with the delivery of this 4-part webinar series to help build capacity around ecosystem resilient projects as a result of the feedback we received from participants in the program workshops that are held each spring. We hope that you find these presentations valuable and are able to incorporate your learnings into your ecological projects. And I'll pass it over to you, Angus.
Thanks very much, Krista. Good morning, everybody. I'll be really brief. Angus with the Fish and Wildlife Compensation Programme. Yeah, it's a 5-way partnership, BC Hydro, the province, DFO, First Nations, and public stakeholders. And as a forward-looking organisation, we're obviously really pleased to be supporting these sessions. I really encourage you to join us on LinkedIn and Instagram. Lynn is just popping those links into the chat right now. And of course, subscribe to our e-letters. We're actually hosting some great online lunchtime sessions coming up, starting a week on Friday about bat conservation, should be fantastic. And then endangered marmots, Murphy Creek spawning channel, and salmon stewardship in the face of climate change. So all of the details are on our events page. So thank you, and back to you, Marcy.
Great. Thanks so much, Krista and Angus. And we are always grateful to the funders and supporters of the Kootenay Conservation Program, including the Columbia Basin Trust and Fish and Wildlife Compensation Program, who are key funders and without whom we couldn't do these sorts of programs. So today is the first webinar in our 4-part series, and we've had such an excellent and interesting group of speakers this year. And before I get to our featured presenter today, I'd like to tell you about upcoming webinars, and we hope to see you all at these. They take place every Wednesday this month, 10 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Mountain time, and beginning next week on the 9th, Building Climate Resiliency into Your Terrestrial Restoration Project. And we'll feature the Bees to Bears project that integrates climate adaptation and restoration in the Kootenay River Valley in Idaho. And Back to Baseline, restoring open forests and cultural burning for climate resilience with AUCOM. Then we'll move to the week following, Building Climate Resiliency in Your Aquatic Restoration Project. And we'll have speakers talking about wetland rehabilitation and management of the Creston Valley Wildlife Management Area, lessons learned from the past, as well as building climate resiliency in aquatic restoration projects using wetland and stream examples from the Columbia Valley. And we'll wrap up our series with effectiveness monitoring, restoration, ecosystem restoration, and effectiveness monitoring, why it's important and how to do it, as well as effectiveness monitoring case study at Big Ranch in the Elk Valley. So I hope to see you all there. And now I would like to introduce our featured presenter, Adrienne Leslie, who's a biologist and project manager with the Nature Conservancy of Canada. And Adrienne's talk is titled Fundamentals of a Restoration Project Planning to Succeed. And he will cover how developing a good project plan at the outset is essential for laying the foundation for a successful restoration project and can help attract the funding required to achieve your objectives. And he'll be using Whitebark Pine restoration as a case study, and we'll explore how to turn an idea into a well-developed plan. So Adrienne, I'll turn it over to you. You can introduce your poll and then begin your presentation when you're ready. Thanks so much.
All right, can you guys see my screen and hear me?
Yes, thanks, Adrienne.
Excellent. Okay, well, thanks very much, Marcy, and thanks to the trust and to the Fish and Wildlife Compensation Program. Really amazed at how many people are here. 136 right now. I was sort of thinking we get about a dozen and we could workshop some ideas, but I think the number of participants here really speaks to the need of this webinar series. So welcome. And I also want to point out the Kootenay Conservation Program 20-year anniversary is this year. We've been around for 20 years. And I'm amazed Marcy didn't plug the celebration that we're going to have in September sometime in Creston, with all the great conservation work that's happened in the Columbia Basin in the last 20 years. So I'm going to talk, we've seen this circle before. We're right here at the top with the vision and plan. And it's a great place to start, obviously, because without a good plan and vision for a project, nothing else it won't work. So it really sets you up right to take action, to monitor, to analyze, to adapt, and then repeat. And the great thing about I really like this circle thing because it's really, it is a process that builds on itself. It gains momentum the more you go around. So I'm going to be talking about Whitebark Pine restoration, a project that was initiated in 2018, but it wasn't a first kick at the can. That the trust has been supporting this whitebark work since 2011. It started on a small scale, and I've been in this process since for over a decade now to get this in Whitebark Pine project rolling and gaining momentum. And so I will be talking a fair bit about Whitebark Pine. It feels a little weird. It's World Wetlands Day. So I could just have easily have talked about a wetland restoration project. It's all the same sort of fundamentals of planning. Doesn't matter what ecosystem we're talking about. It's still the same sort of process that we're going to go through. So I'm going to sort of walk through sort of who Nature Conservancy of Canada is very briefly, and then I'm going to talk about all the elements of a project plan, starting from the introduction, clear goals, SMART objectives. It's an acronym, and then your work plan and how that all leads into a budget. And so I'd be very curious to sort of, I think we have a poll ready, Marcy, where I'm hoping you all can sort of click on one of the options to tell me what sort of restoration projects you are working on, considering, planning, that sort of thing. And we've got several different options. And if you could all just take the time to click on one of those, so I just get a better sense of who I'm speaking to and what sort of examples I should draw on. Just give everybody 30 seconds to click on something here. Is that good, Marcy? Or Kendall, sorry. Do you have any results we can show? Ah, there it is. World Wetlands Day, 42%. Aquatic, another 16. Excellent. Okay, so I'll try and talk about wetlands as much as possible. Briefly, Nature Conservancy of Canada, we're a national land trust. We purchase and conserve land right across the country from coast to coast. And in BC, we've got projects all over the place. I'm sitting in Nelson here. There we go. I'm sitting at my desk in Nelson. And I'm going to be talking about Darkwoods, which is this large conservation property. It's the biggest one in Canada, actually. 63,000 hectares of forested wetlands, lakefront ecosystems. that's nicely connected to, actually right to Nelson through West Arm Park and the Crescent Valley Wildlife Management Area. And then this pink that you see is where we can expect to find whitebark pine. So I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. Brief introduction to whitebark pine itself. And I'm going to talk about it sort of throughout, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but just to let you know, it's a tree, it's a pine species, a species of pine that lives high elevation, really dry, rocky terrain at the tops of mountains and along ridges. And if you're ever up in the mountains, you can see most trees are sort of shaped like carrot tops, very pointy, so the snow sheds off. Whitebark pine has a different branching structure that's much more, that actually breaks a lot more often, and I can get into why that is. But that's, when you're out there, that's the sort of key identifying feature you can key in on. So the first step of a project really is the vision. Like, what is it you're trying to achieve, and where are you going to do it? And hopefully you've all got some sense of this, and as far as what your project is. But really, once you sort of have a general idea of what you want to do, you really got to do your homework, and figure out what is already out there from management plans and recovery plans. There's lots of information on many different things. Look at this latest scientific research, and critically what's already been done, so that you can place your project within that circle of restoration. And what that is going to do, and as you're doing your homework, it's going to help identify partners. And when I say partners, I mean people or organizations that are going to help you achieve your vision. Typically, partnership sort of gets pushed to the end of projects and proposals, but I want to put it right out front, because identifying partners early and often will just make your project so much better. And so when I'm going through this today, I'm going to go through it in the sort of a structure of what a typical project plan looks like. I'm not going to say, give you like what needs to be filled in what box for the trust specific funding call or anything like that. It's more of the story that you want to be able to tell through your project plan. And it all starts with a good introduction. You state the problem. Why are you doing this? Why are you asking for money? Why do you need my help? When you're introducing it, you want to be sure to reference the latest scientific information, sort of show you've done your research, that you know what you're talking about, that you've read up on things, and you've got some weight behind your project. Climate change, this is 2022. If you're not talking about climate change, you're showing that you're trying to stick your head in the sand and not realize that the world is changing around us. So you really have to place your project in the context of climate change. I think that's sort of, it's one of the main reasons, one of the main foci of this webinar series. Talk about highlight past work that led to this project. So like I said, you see this loop here. You don't want to just start with a plan, like I've got a vision, I'm going to save the world doing this. You want to show that I've already done some work, or other people have already done the work. We're already in this planning cycle as much as you can, if there is anything. And then certainly you got to describe where you're going to do it. Great maps are critical, I think, for making people understand and getting your point across of what you're trying to accomplish. Like I said, it's all about a story. We're humans, like hearing stories, so we're introducing it. The introduction. Here is whitebark pine, and the main reason, the issue that's the problem is white pine blister rust. So it's this fungus, a non-native fungus that comes in and has come in over the last 100 years and is slowly wiping out whitebark pine as well as other 5-needle pines. It's a fungus that lands on the needles and then works its way underneath the bark and then comes out like this and will eventually, and it kills everything that's above it. So over the period of 2 to 20 years, it kills trees. And so we've got that issue, and then and that blister rust will attack anything from a small sapling to a fully grown tree. They can grow very large, but when they do grow very large, they get hit by mountain pine beetle, and especially with a warmer climate, we're getting more and more pine beetle attacking it. And so when you have pine beetle, you have lots of fuels. And so you can see a lot of, these are all pine beetle killed trees. These trees are 300 to 500 years old and now dead. And this stand this is on Mount McGregor in Darkwoods, tons of fuels. And this is what you get. So this is July, just after our heat dome, around July 15th or 12th. So we have climate change, heat dome, it was 44 degrees here, dried everything out. We had a little spark, the lightning strike, and this whole side of the mountain burnt in 3 hours because of the pine beetle, the fuels, the heat, all that came together. And then with climate change, one of the important reasons that we want to conserve and restore whitebark pine is that it's a pioneer species. This is a picture I took right behind Mount Robson. Actually, it's pioneers behind retreating glaciers. So there's, and I would talk a lot about sort of the past, the restoration plans that are in place. I would place it sort of in the context of climate change and what's already been done, and showing that the project that I'm proposing is in line with all the other restoration plans and projects that are out there. And then I would also talk about the past work that has been done. And I would show, this is a pilot project that we planted. These are bundles of whitebark pine that we planted, I want to say 2013, our first go around. So our first loop around this cycle ended here. And so I've shown that in my introduction. So we've sort of started broad. This is the problem. This is the solutions. This is what we've already done. This is where we're going to do it. And that's your introduction. And as you're going through that process of doing your homework and sort of ticking all those boxes, you're going to start to identify partners. And so when I'm talking about partners, it can be anything, but really what they do is they help bring different perspectives, different skill sets, resources, data gaps. If there's things you don't think about, I could do probably a decent project on my own without talking to anybody. It might work, it might not, but the more partners you bring in, more different perspectives, you're more likely to succeed, and you might also find some additional co-benefits of your project, that a small tweak in how you do things could improve the overall project. And of course, the more partners, it improves your chances of successful funding. But funding sort of follows. If you have a good project, the funding is sort of it should be the last step. Your project should be driven by what you want to do, and then you find the funding to go and do it. So when I'm talking about partnerships, I have sort of 5 broad categories of partnerships you're going to want to try to engage in. Certainly First Nations is a critical one. Where are you working, and what nations traditionally have an interest in that land, and what is their interest in your particular project? If you can get academic partners, it inspires confidence. They help fill data gaps, help fill out that sort of science side of thing. Government organizations, it helps with various different things. Parks, other environmental organizations, and industry if possible. It's industry is a really great partner to have, because it can sort of show that you're not going to be upsetting everybody. At least you're not going to destroy the economy. So for the Whitebark Pine project, we managed to tick all these boxes, and each one of these sort of broader categories has brought different things to the table and has made the project better. So I mentioned that partners can help identify other issues. And so when I'm talking about Whitebark Pine, it's a tree, but it's also a keystone species in the ecosystem, and things that happen in Whitebark Pine habitat will impact many other things. And so it affects, we've got bull trout here, needs cold, clean water to survive, and Whitebark Pine helps maintain the snowpack and clean the water and that sort of thing. We've got Clark's nutcracker here, which is obviously is dependent on Whitebark Pine, and Whitebark Pine is dependent on Clark's nutcracker. So what happens to the whitebark happens to the nutcracker. The populations are linked. We've got wolverines and mountain goats. They live out in these ecosystems. They need peace and quiet and no humans, basically. And grizzly bears is another interesting one. Grizzly bears feed on whitebark pine cones. Not so much around here these days because the population has been decimated, but in areas where there is a lot of whitebark, the grizzly bears will feed on whitebark extensively. And then there's also the sort of the co-benefits of grizzly bears feeding on huckleberries, and huckleberries and whitebark pine go very well together. The vaccinium and the whitebark share mycorrhizae, so where you have good huckleberry habitat, you also tend to have good whitebark habitat, or the other way around, I should say. Good whitebark means good huckleberry, which means good grizzly bear habitat. And so once you sort of identify that feature in the science, you're like, oh, well, I should talk to the grizzly bear people, or maybe that'll help bolster your argument or your reasoning for the restoration project. Partners will help identify restoration sites. So Selkirk College, work with them to help identify where the good potential habitat is, and you lay that over recent fire layers, and you can identify spots. And then of course you have to go ground truth and go walk the ground and see how it looks. And so this particular spot is right in the middle of Darkwoods. It burned in 2018, and we planted about 5,000 whitebark pine in here this past summer. So I mentioned we have funders, and we also have partners, and sometimes there's overlap and sometimes there's not. So the trust, like I mentioned, has been supporting this project. Fish and Wildlife Compensation Program supports other projects, wetland projects that we work on, for example. And then we've got various in-kind support. I've got 3 here, but as the project has gone on, we've grown this list. So once you've got your sort of introduction, what you want to have is a pithy goals statement. Sort of what's the purpose of the project? What are you going to accomplish? And it's got to relate directly to the problem that you identified. And so that's sort of the first step. And then these goals will be achieved by meeting the objectives, which I'll go into next. And so for the Whitebark Pine project, this is my simple goal, is to restore functioning and self-sustaining whitebark pine ecosystems in Darkwoods. Super simple. You can have other sort of secondary goals, but it's nice to have sort of a single goal of a project that you can pitch in an elevator. That specific goal will lead to objectives. And so the SMART objectives, again, this is an acronym. There's lots of information online about this, but if there's one takeaway that you get from this presentation is really spend a lot of time on SMART objectives. And so when I say SMART, you want the objectives to be very specific. You state clearly what's going to be done and by who. They have to be measurable. And so we'll get back into, you'll see why this is important in our cycle. You've got to be able to monitor the progress and show what's being achieved. It's got to be achievable, attainable, possible, using available resources and best available science. So you want to be challenging, but you don't want to like promise the world you're not going to, solve climate change by doing this project. It's got to be relevant. Your objective has to relate directly to your project and focus on results rather than the means how you're going to achieve them. And finally, they have to be time bound. So a date. When are you going to have this done by? So one project can have many objectives, but they're all focused on meeting the project goals. So you've got a goal. You've got, in this, I'm going to show, I think, 3 examples of objectives, but in this project, I've got 8 or 9 different objectives, and each of them I like to think are smart. This one, so I'm just going to go through a couple of examples just so you guys can sort of start to think about what your project objectives are and how you might create smart statements. And so collect 200,000 whitebark pine seeds from blister rust resistant trees on Darkwoods. So blister rust resistant trees, those are the trees that look like they don't have blister rust, they don't have that fungus, and therefore they might be able to pass that genetic resistance on to their offspring, their seeds. So is this smart? Not quite. It's close. It's not quite specific enough because it didn't say who's going to do it. So NCC will collect this many seeds, and it didn't say when it's going to be done by. So it wasn't time bound. This is smart down here. NCC is going to do it. We're going to collect this many. We're going to do it in Darkwoods, and we're going to do it by October 2018. Objective number 2, TP Mountain native plants, going to grow 60,000 seedlings for NCC to plant over 120 hectares, 8 different restoration sites on Darkwoods by 2023. I think that ticks all the boxes. It's specific. It's definitely measurable. It's a stretch goal. We've never planted 60,000 seedlings. We've planted 1,500. But we know how it's done, and so it is achievable. It's a stretch, but it's doable. It's obviously relevant to the goal of restoring self-sustaining ecosystems, and it's time bound. 2023, we got to get this done. We're a third of the way there, and I've got 2 more years to do it. Another one, this is not very smart. It's pretty broad to work with partners and share expertise. We want to be a lot more specific. Time-bound, relevant. So once you have your SMART objectives, you look at the logistics, basically what's constraining your project when you're looking at building a work plan and how you're going to meet those objectives. You add them together. So you've got various different constraints, permitting what you can do where, legislation. The Migratory Bird Act will tell you when you can do, if you're going to do forestry activities, you want to do it outside of certain windows. The Species at Risk Act, you want to make sure that if you're on federal land, you're not going to be disrupting any other species at risk. So Mark Andre at the Crescent Valley Wildlife Management Area will tell you all about challenges related to that when you're trying to restore leopard frog habitat and you're also in sturgeon habitat. It's a challenge he has to overcome. Archaeological surveys, various safety issues, access, you can't get to everywhere all the time. So all those things come together to provide a work plan. And so your work plan, you started with one goal, 8 objectives, and then each objective is going to be achieved through your work plan. And your work plan says what needs to be done, who's going to do it, and when it's going to be done. And once you figure that out, the last step is, well, how much is all this going to cost? How am I going to fund this project? But so with this, just using the one example, My first objective, collect 200,000 Whitebark Pine seeds by October 2018. So in my proposal, it was quite simple. I laid out what's going to be done, who's going to do it, when it's going to be done by, and how much it's going to cost. Got 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. We identified the sites. I hire some people to climb trees. I used to do this, but it's way better to hire professionals to do this stuff. Much safer, much quicker, much more efficient than what I can do fumbling around at the top of the tree. So you go there in July and put cages over the cones so the nutcrackers don't get them. You go back in September, October, and have snow most likely, and collect the cones when they're ready, and then there's the seeds. This is why bears love them. These things have more energy than chocolate in them. Bears go crazy over them, nutcrackers go crazy over them. And then boom, objective number 1 is complete. And then I would go on to objective number 2, whatever that was. These are the steps I'm going to take to achieve objective 2. So the great thing about SMART objectives is that they lend themselves to measurable outcomes. And this is going to be the third part, the fourth part of this series, webinar series is about whichever, third or fourth part, about monitoring and analyzing. So our objective is easily measurable. This is another one, another measurable outcome. They're going to grow 20,000 seedlings. Oh, sorry, this is the outcomes. We've NCC collected, so we've measured, we aimed for 200,000, we got 300,000. TP mountain native plants, they're now Nuku native plants. They grew 20,000 seedlings, and they've got more on the way. So this is where we're at now. We've got another 40,000 coming in next summer. Another objective, I think I actually cut this out of the presentation, but we had excess seeds. We donated them to other projects to help them in their process to help gain momentum. And then the other measurable outcome, one of my objectives was to share results. And so here I am sharing results, and I've done this in other venues as well. And very measurable. They're the seedlings, can't deny that they're there, and there's a little seedling in the ground planted in the recently burned area. So very measurable. The objectives are measurable. You measure them. You can demonstrate your success, and that does several things. Once you're measuring success, you're looking at outcomes and the lessons learned. So what did you learn along the way, and what worked and what didn't work? The greenhouse, we purposely set it up so that they would grow a few 20,000 seedlings per year over 3 years, because it's a learning process. They had done some growing in the past with mixed results. As the time goes on, they try different things and build on that. So each year their seedlings are getting more plentiful and bigger. And better. So those lessons learned allow you to adapt and share throughout the process. I mean, all this is sort of this is always going on at the same time. You're adapting pretty much from day one. You have to start adapting to a certain degree. And surprisingly, the funders, this is the reason they're putting this presentation on, is because they need good projects, right? They need to have proponents provide proposals that can tell a good story, that can show that they have a clear vision, clear plan, take action. They're measurable results that you can see, so that at the end of a funding cycle that a funder can show that they funded this many projects and these objectives were achieved. We can show that we have a successful project that allows them to get more money to keep their program going. And not only that, NCC and many other people are always looking for more partners. So that's why I wanted to be here today and talk about good projects, is because we're always looking for good projects. I'm the West Kootenay project manager for the Nature Conservancy, and I'm one person. So everything I do is done with partners, and we've got this huge land base and lots of different things that can be done on different restoration projects that can be done on that. So the reason that I'm here today and why I work with the Kootenay Conservation Program, I've been on the board for a long time, is because they help bring people together and bring partners together to make projects better. So just to recap, it's really about the story here. So it's, like I said at the outset, you want to be able to tell your story. And if there's two things to take home from this, is it's partnerships are critical. No project is done on, you can't even put a webinar without getting partners together. You know, the world today requires the partnerships, and then the SMART objectives. It all hinges on that. If you don't have clear, time-bound, good objectives, then it's harder to tell if you've achieved what you want to achieve. Like I want to save the world. How are we going to show that we actually did that? And everything, the goal leads into the SMART objectives. The SMART objectives leads directly into the work plan and the budget, and is going to tell you how you're going to take action. Measures the outcomes based on those SMART objectives, and then allows you to learn. And this, I threw this in here, this celebrate and share is something I'm terrible at, but it is really important to really talk and celebrate those successes when you have done something, when you have completed a project. So this 20-year celebration that KCP is having in September, I'm really looking forward to it, because we're going to hear about all these different projects that have happened, get people excited about, and to get you back on to this part here. So we've shown, we adapt, share, celebrate. That's what the sharing and celebrating. And then you get back to work. You say, okay, we did this, but hey, we've learned that we need to do more for this species, or we need to do more whitebark pine planting, or whatever the case may be. And that's where you get to the next project. So it's really a rinse and repeat and grow kind of scenario, with momentum and more partners. And with that, look at that, we've got time for questions. I'll put my contact information up here, the website, if you want some more information. I think, Marcy, that's all. That's sort of the key of what I wanted to get across. And if you don't have any questions, I can start talking about some wetland restoration work, but hopefully people have some questions. Either you can put into the text box, either specific to your project, or more general about planning, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adrian. That was a really concise talk about and walking us through all the different steps. So great example there. So I am looking in the Q&A box. So if that's where you could please put your questions, not the chat box, the Q&A. And I'm going to focus mostly on picking those questions out that are about project planning, rather than about whitebark pine and other things, because although the ecology is super important, we really want to make sure we talk about what's going on in terms of how we're designing our projects. So there's a question here about managing and tracking SMART objectives and the associated activities that people are tasked to do, specific timeframes, project management programs that organizations are using to schedule and track this? Are those sorts of programs out there that you know about, Adrian? And how can we help set people up for success from the start, so they can track how all of this is tying together?
Yeah, it's called Microsoft Excel. It's just a simple spreadsheet that I put together at the outset of the project with the budget and the work plan. This project is a bit complicated because it's a multi-year project, so it changes over time. But I've got year one, and it's basically the work plan with the numbers associated with it. So you have, I'll pick the cone collection. So the line item would be collecting whitebark pine cones, and you have a dollar amount associated with that. And so once you complete that stage, that step, and you paid the invoice, you've got the column for what you propose, and then you've got your actual expenses. And so it's just a matter of keeping that up to date. Every time there's a new, as a project manager, you always have I always have a spreadsheet for every single project, and it'll have sort of the one sheet will have, or the one page will have that sort of overview. And then if there's quotes and various other pieces of information, planting sites or whatever, that also belong in that project, you can have that as separate worksheets within your Excel spreadsheet. And so, yeah, it's really a matter of just staying on top of what's happened and updating it. And like I said, it's your project is going to start changing, but after you hit send on your proposal, things are going to start changing a little bit. So you're always going to be adapting as you go. And so, yeah, it's not, there probably are, I'm sure there are fancy project management programs out there, but really all I've ever needed is a spreadsheet and diligence to keep it up to speed and up to date.
Yeah. And it's also challenging to sort of build in all the linkages between cells across worksheets. So, but if you can do that, it does really help to organize everything and roll it all up. So another question we have here is more about the partnerships you were talking about, Adrian. So someone's wondering about some of the nonprofits and charities that you're partnering with.
Well, so it depends on sort of what the project is. So I mentioned, let's talk about wetlands here for a minute. I've got a wetland project down in Creston that we set in motion several years ago, but we finally started implementing last year. And so other NGO, like I work with the Fish and Wildlife Compensation Program. They've helped quite a lot with providing expertise. I'm a tree guy, and this wetland project was focused on northern leopard frogs. So I need to rely on my partners to provide that science, that background, those elements to make the project better and make it work. So, and then so in the Whitebark Pine project, BC Parks is directly adjacent to Nature Conserve. The West Arm Park is directly adjacent, and so because the nutcracker and the population of Whitebark Pine knows no boundaries, it's all the same to the nutcracker and to the bird. It's all the same. So the more healthy Whitebark Pine ecosystems we have around Darkwoods, the better the population is within it. So I talked to BC Parks and got them involved, and eventually through the Forest Carbon Initiative, they planted this past summer, can't remember, 20,000 some odd seedlings in West Arm Park as well, and in Whitewater Ski Resort actually, which is also directly adjacent, and in Harrop Proctor Community Forest. So the partnerships, so the nonprofit partnerships, are really driven by who's already what geographic scope is and who's already in the game, basically. So the wetland example will be the compensation program, and the Crescent Valley Wildlife Management Area. They're directly adjacent. Why don't I just go like that? So these are these wetlands that were drained and farmed for 30, 40, 50 years, directly adjacent to the Crescent Valley Wildlife Management Area. This is the old Goat River Channel in Creston. So we sort of couched this restoration project. We showed what had already been done 5 years prior when we first sort of conceived of this, some wetlands that were done over here. And so that really is the project that shows which partners you're going to want to look for. And with the Whitebark one, I certainly talked to the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation, for example. I don't know if that answers the question very well, but it's hard to sort of generalize without getting specific.
Yeah, I think it was just generally when you went through your list of partners, just wondering if you had examples of ANGOs. And I also have another question, Adrian, related to how with Darkwoods you've engaged industry. Do you have any tips? And just explain Darkwoods in the sense of, whether there is or is not a logging tenure there, and engaging with tenure holders.
Yeah, it's so Darkwoods it's private property, so it's a little bit different. Most tenure holders are working on public land. But we engage with adjacent tenure holders, so Hushcroft and Windlebox, now Canfor. We do have a small scale harvest on Darkwoods that we focus on dryland restoration. So right close to Creston, we have a forest thinning project in the NDT4 where we're removing a bunch of cedar that's dying out because of climate change. And in order to get that project done, I work with the partners that are used to logging and to selling wood products and have mills. So this past summer, when we had a fire going on in Darkwoods, 6,000 hectare fire was burning. We built a fire guard. I talked to my buddies over at Canfor to help build this fire guard, and they were able to sell the wood for us and sort of make it happen at a dizzying pace. But that's because we had worked with, just because of the landscape that I'm working in, I'd worked with them before. And so I was able just to call them up and say, hey guys, we got a fire, I need some help. And they were able to help.
Okay, great. Here's one about funders, and in terms of your perspective on whether you build a project with specific funders' priorities in mind, and if not, how much do you change a project and its goals and work plans to fit in with funders' objectives?
Oh, that's a good question. Like I said before, ideally you're not seeing a request for proposals and then dreaming up a project to make it fit in there. I know that does happen, but I think the best projects are the ones that you have a vision of, this is what I want to do. With the Whitebark Pine, I spent a lot of time. I used to work for Parks Canada, and we did Whitebark Pine stuff, and I wanted to do Whitebark Pine restoration, and I found the trust that was willing to support it, and that's sort of how it went. Now, how much you want to change your project based on the needs of the funder, well, that depends. I mean, quite often a funder will have many of the same objectives, and if they want any changes, or if you want to highlight certain parts of your project more to appease the funders, quite often that'll just make your project better anyway. But I wouldn't go out of your way to, if a funding source just doesn't fit with your project, and in order to make it fit with your project, you have to sort of divert or change your vision, your overall objective, then you really have to question why you're doing this and whether or not this is the right funder. Yeah, it's a tough question to answer. I hear the challenge, because it feels like there's limited funders out there. But I will say the more you get in that wheel, the more funders come out of the woodwork, because once I can demonstrate, I have measures of success, I can show I delivered this project, then other funders will either present themselves, or you'll find other funders in some way that will help the next stage of your project.
Okay.
Sorry if
Thanks.
I'm not more specific there, but.
Yeah, well, we're getting close to 11 o'clock and the end of the webinar. I wanted to say that there's been 2 resources that may be helpful that have come through either the Q&A or the chat. And one is that when Adrian was referring to project management using Excel, Microsoft Excel, there was a reminder that Selkirk College has project management courses. So if you want to spiff up your skills that way, maybe look at Selkirk College. And then also a suggestion to look at the Society for Ecological Restoration International Principles and Standards for the Practice of Ecological Restoration to help guide your work.
Yes, sorry.
No, go ahead, Adrian.
I was just going to say that's a great resource, Society for Ecological Restoration. I was actually flipped through my old copy of whatever their textbook was just at the outset of this when I was putting this project together, and was reminded of how sort of basic those concepts are, and I think it's sort of ingrained in what I do now. But when you're just sort of starting out, that program really does. And I think they use SMART objectives as well. I mean, it's like I said, I think there's lots of resources online if you want to set how to set up SMART objectives. So I would encourage you to look at those resources as well. Sorry, go ahead, Marcy.
No, Adrian, I just want to thank you very much for your excellent presentation and this great fielding of questions. And on behalf of KCP and the Trust and FWCP, I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us for the webinar today. And we will be following up with an email and with some resources and links, and we'll look for that Society for Ecological Restoration resource as well. And please look for a post-webinar survey. Your answers really help guide how we shape these series. So we really appreciate your feedback. It's a very short survey, but very much appreciated. And I hope to see many of you next week for our next webinar, Building Climate Resiliency into Your Terrestrial Registration Project. There were some questions left in the Q&A box, and here's Adrian's contact information if you would like to be in touch with him personally about anything having to do with Darkwoods, Whitebark Pine, wetland restoration in Creston, or just to say hi and thank you. So I would just like to pass the baton over to Krista and Angus if there's anything that either of you would like to say in closing.
Thanks, Marcy. I just want to thank everyone for their time and really hope it was helpful, and have a great rest of your day.
Great, yeah, thanks. Great presentation, great turnout, and I'll follow up with a few people individually as well about some of the points that have come up. So thank you all. Excellent.
Thanks, everyone. It was fun.
And thanks to this team. It was our first webinar. We hope to see you next week for our second one. It's a great month of learning. Have a great day and take care. Bye.